Welcome. Come on in. Find a seat. All right. Well, thanks everyone for being here. And this class was originally conceived with the idea that Philippe would join us today because Philippe has actually attended the Zurich MOT events in the past. And so it was sort of a sad day when we discovered that it would have to be turned into something of a memorial to him, a legacy event, rather than having him actually here to participate and talk about the wines himself. For those of you who didn't know, Philippe Cambie was, one of the greatest consulting enologists in the world. Robert Parker called him one of the world's greatest winemakers, and I think for anyone who loves Rhône wines, there's no question that that's the case. He was born in 1962 in Languedoc, in wine town, Pézenas. He studied a little bit at Montpellier. But of course, his first love for anyone who knows him was rugby. And Philippe was not one of the speedy little flankers out on the wing. Philippe was one of the big guys in the middle. I don't know the rugby positions, but he was a big, muscular man, and that's where he fought his early wars, I guess, in the scrums of rugby. He first came to Châteauneuf-du-Pape in 1986, so in his early 20s, and he played on a regional rugby team there. And he worked in a bottling plant for one of the producers there. He went away. He had a few other jobs in and out of wineries, cork suppliers, things like that. But he returned to Châteauneuf in 1998 as an enologist for one of the laboratories that service the wine industry in town. And at that time, he was asked by some of his friends who he'd known from his rugby days if he could help them out with their vinifications, I guess, and some of the decisions they were having to make in the wineries. And that's how he got started. He started with his first client, I believe, was Domaine Giraud. And it grew from there. And we're fortunate today. We have a couple of his clients, I suppose. We're talking about him as if he's still here. And his wines are still here. So that's the great legacy of Philippe. But we do have a couple of the producers here in the room, and maybe they can talk a little bit about their wines when we get to them. Philippe ended up being an advisor to dozens of estates all over the world. He had clients. I know he made me taste wines from Macedonia the last time I saw him. That was one of his favorite projects, sort of outside of France. And he had a joint venture making Pinot Noir in California with a California winemaker. So we're going to focus on Grenache and the Southern Rhône because that's sort of what he's best known for. But I think it's important to know that good winemakers, and I think great winemakers, are able to adapt to different terroirs, different places, different grape varieties. And I think in particular with Philippe, one of the things I took away from meeting with him and tasting with him over the period of years is that he was not a dictatorial consultant. I don't think he told people how they should do their work. He listened to them. He learned from them what they wanted to achieve in their wines, and he helped them to do that. And a lot of that probably came down to looking at micro vinifications and looking at smaller parcels of the vineyard and vinifying them separately, and then blending them together or keeping them apart, depending on what made the better wine, what made the wine that better matched the owner's vision of the wine that they wanted to make. So that's the little bit about Philippe. Philippe passed away in December of 2021. But yeah, we're fortunate to have a bunch of the wines here today. And of course, a bunch of wines that he advised on and consulted on are still on the market, just entering the market, and so forth. So you can still own a little bit of Philippe and his legacy and hold it in your cellar if you want to do that. Yeah, we started with a serious picture, right? Because, I mean, we have to be serious. But here, this is from last fall when I was in the Rhône. So that's probably at the end of a pretty long day, because Philippe would gather wines from a bunch of his clients and show them to me at once. And I could always count on Philippe to organize this for me on a Sunday when most winemakers are less happy to see media. So it was always a big day of tasting. We have Philippe, Michel Gassier, some of the other clients, and we were at Domaine La Présidente in Sainte-Cécile. So that was actually the last time I saw him. Now we'll lift the mood a little bit. We'll get into the wines, and we can start. Wine number 1 is from Domaine des Bosquets in Gigondas. It's a very special cuvée called Le Regard Loin. Julian, do you want to translate that for us? Because the long view, is that something along those lines?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah. Okay. And it's a cuvée that resulted from micro-vinifications, all these different plots separately that Julian usually bottles separately, and then a selection of each one of those blended back together to create this wine. And also there's a specific aging component to this as well, right, Julian? Loudly, so we can all hear. Yeah, just take a moment and give us a little bit about the wine.
Everybody, thank you for the tribute to Philippe. We are very happy. He was more than a consultant. He was a friend, so we are happy to taste with you today. So just a word on that wine. Domaine des Bosquets in Gigondas is a very old estate. We make a lot of single vineyard selections, and with Philippe, we try in 10 years to make all the parts of the estate separated in terms of vinification in order to understand what was the identity of each terroir, each grape variety, and more than that, each microclimate. So that wine is, for me, very important for us because this is the last wine we did with Philippe. And in the history of the 12 years we spent together at the estate, we released 5 single vineyard selections: the Lieu-dit, La Colline, Le Plateau, Les Routes, and Grenache. And the 5 are today very representative of their place. And this wine was for me the end of the story after these 10 years of investigations, because we did first identities, and one day we spoke about that with Philippe one evening, and he told me maybe it would be interesting to add each part of your work during 10 years to make one wine which is even higher than the sum of the 5. So we did that. We spent 2 hours to make blends, and of course with Philippe we try something else, but the first is always the best. And we did that one day. So we have the 5 single vineyard selection inside, with 1 year specific in aging in barrels for Syrah, demi-muit for Mourvèdre and Grenache, and after 1 year we blend Le Regard Loin just for 9 hectoliters, it means about 1,000 bottles. And we spent another year in small jars of sandstone, finish to produce the wine. So this is for us is the ultimate wine of the estates, and more than that, a tribute to Philippe because this is the last we did together.
Yeah. Thank you, Julian, and thank you for being here and providing the wine. So yeah, it's for me it's a magnificent wine. It captures that spirit of the Southern Rhône, the garrigue, the licorice, the ripe sort of black cherry fruit, and yeah, just I tasted it out of jars about a year ago. So this is the second time I've actually tasted it from bottle, because I tasted it last fall when I visited Julian, and but this is the review from the first time, and yeah, there you go. It's like I said, it's one of the best Gigondas I've ever tasted, and a fitting way to start off a tasting in tribute to Philippe. Anyone have any questions on that particular wine?
Can I just ask?
Yes.
Percentage of CI?
So there's a question about varietal composition here, and I'll stop this right there, Julian, because I know. So it's a blend of the 5 different parcels, some of which are they're monovarietal, but Julian does not disclose what proportion of each plot goes into the final blend here. So it's a Gigondas. Okay? You can try to corner him afterwards if you want to beat him up for it, but that's the way it is. It's I mean it's in essence they broke the vineyard apart into pieces and then put it back together in this form, and it represents the pinnacle of the domain. We move on to the next wine if there's no more questions about that one. Next wine is the La Louisiane from Domaine Saint-Damien. So another Gigondas. This Gigondas comes from vineyards that are a little lower down in elevation. Yeah. This one I have the percentages in the note. Yeah, I mean for me that's the fruit maybe is a little darker, more sort of purple, if you will. I don't know if you guys talk in colors of fruit, but that's often a way I think of them, in different shades of color. So red fruit, purple fruit, black fruit. Sometimes there's blue fruits like blueberries. I don't know. I mean, this is has that nice garrigue flavor as well. And one of the nice things about this particular wine is it's aged in larger oak, so you don't get a lot of oak influence. You really get the influence of the vineyard. And that's, just to touch on that a little bit, Philippe consulted largely on the wine making, the harvest dates, the time to press the wine, and the blending. But he was also a proponent of people farming well. He encouraged people to practice organic in the vineyards because he felt that was a stronger connection than to the land in terms of connecting the wine to the fruit, to the land. And so, yeah, this is another super example from the 2019 vintage. And I think for me, 2019 in Gigondas is clearly a strong year. Question? Yeah.
I had the impression that the summer and the wonderful summer is more in this the first bottle than in the second. I don't know if that gives you any sense at all, but.
When you're talking about the summer, you mean the power of the sun, the alcohol, or just more the outlook of the wine, I guess. Like all of a sudden it's sunny outside, and
But the nose is kind of more strong summer
in the first one. Yeah. No, I think there's a great amount of complexity in that first wine, and for me, I even get some orange zest and cardamom and almost like sort of Campari-like spice elements. They kind of make you think of summer. Sure. Wine number 3. So wine number 3 was supposed to be the 2019 Cuvée Centenaire, but because of an accident in customs, we're getting to benefit from that. We're getting an aged example of one of these wines, and it's the 2007. So if any of you write down on your mats or in your books, you want to make that change, and not talk to me later about how come I didn't have the fresh wine. But in fact, it's probably a decent way to separate the young Gigondas from the young Chateauneufs. So we've got the 2007 Cuvée Centenaire. It's actually Bob Parker's note on it up there. So, it's Centenaire, 100-year-old vines. Bob says 120 in that particular note. Obviously, in these old vineyards, when one vine dies, a lot of times they'll just replant in the same location. So some of the vines are 120 years old, some are not quite that old. But that's traditionally the way it's done in Chateauneuf. When a vine dies, rather than ripping out the whole vineyard, you just replant the one. Until there comes a point when it makes more sense to rip out the whole vineyard and replant it all at once. It's mainly Grenache. These old vineyards were often interplanted or co-planted with different varieties. This it's mainly Grenache, some Mourvèdre. I would venture to say that if there is Syrah, it's not 120 years old. Because Syrah was not really widely planted in the southern Rhône 120 years ago. So this wine, quite different, right? I mean, we're talking about an older wine. You can see the color. It's faded. It's bricking a little bit. At least my bottle still tastes pretty sound. It's beautifully silky. There's still fruit, lots of spice elements. Again, this particular cuvée for me, it always has a softer, almost Burgundian feel or style to it. And I think you get that in this particular vintage, especially. And again, that for me, it's really hard to put into words the spice elements that I find there. I think of it's complex. It's I don't know what the recipe for Campari is. I have to find that out because that's one of my triggers. It's like it's spicy, kind of like Campari. Some orange zest. It's cinnamon doesn't really describe it. Clove doesn't really describe it. It's just a complex spice mix, and something we as wine writers often struggle with is how exactly to communicate what we're tasting, and we're supposed to be the experts on that, and sometimes we still fall short, I'm afraid. But anyway, a really, really lovely sort of interlude, and any questions on that one? It's a little jarring maybe to go from such young wines to a more mature one, but I think you'll see in the lineup. Well, it would have been the 19, so it wouldn't have been jarring at all. But this will make actually a good break before we get into the Chateauneufs. No questions. All right. We'll keep plowing ahead, and we'll tackle the next wine. So wine 4 is from Rhône, and this is a winery, I think, really interesting sort of history to it, right? Because it's a négociant, so I can't tell you exactly where the grapes are from. You know, in good French négociant tradition, they don't reveal their sources, their growers, or if they do, they sort of whisper them to you and say, "Yeah, but you can't write that." So, can't tell you much about the origins of this particular wine. What I can say about Rhône is that the wines used to be, for my palate, brutally over-oaked. There was this fascination with the barrels of Dominique Laurent, and even called them magic barrels, and they were just used to excess in this winery in the past. And when you look at the wines now, they've really come a long way, and I think Philippe has had a lot to do with that in terms of lessening the impact of oak on the wines. And this is a very young Chateauneuf from 2018. And even though it's young, you don't really get that much oak in it relative to what they used to be. So I know my note mentions vanilla and cedar, but if you had ever tasted like 2005 Chateau Laurent wines from the Southern Rhône, you would have really choked on the splinters. 2018 in the Southern Rhône is a really interesting vintage. There was a lot of mildew early in the season, and so the crops were smaller than usual. And yet, in the end, the wines came around pretty well. And I think even though you had smaller yields and some, there's a certain softness and approachability to these wines that you don't always get in vintages that have small yields. So it's a really nice way to get into the younger Chateauneufs, I think, and you really see the silkiness of Grenache in that particular wine. Questions on that one? Yeah, we're just marching along. Everyone's happy, huh? Tasting wine, like, yeah, these are pretty good. The room's starting to warm up a little. The room felt chilly at the beginning, right? How's it feel now? Better. Better, says the woman with no sleeves. Yeah, okay. Anyway, we'll move to wine number 5. So wine number 5 comes from Chateau Vuju, vintage 2017, from a parcel called L'Avenue. So, interesting fact about Chateau Vuju. So it's owned and managed by Julian's brother, Laurent Pochet. Don't worry, we won't ask you to talk about this one. No, you want to? No. Well, you know, I'm a sucker for French accent. You know that.
Speak about that one because it's not mine, but my brother's.
It's, yeah. Yeah. Just so you know, this is being recorded. So.
We have more or less the same approach in order to identify the single vineyard selection and the best placing on the estate. So this is the other estate of the family in Chateau Vuju, and this wine is my favorite of the estate because this is the more refined and the most focused on the finesse and the freshness and the balance. It's a Grenache old vines planted just beside the Chateau Rayas, and it's not exactly the same exposure and microclimate than the Rayas, but it's a no Grenache on time you have freshness, because when you're on sands, you are near relief, and the relief always bring shadow on the plants. And when you have shadow, you have a good acidity, so you find that in the wine. And at the same time, you have a good aging, which is interesting, because we made the same with Le Lieu-dit and Avenue. It's all barrels of 600 liters in order to polish the wine and not to make it up. So that it's very close to the genuine taste. So it's a Grenache on sands with freshness.
Thanks, Julian. No, I mean, for me, this is a wine that shows just remarkable finesse and elegance. And even though it's 2017 it's a good vintage, I guess, in Châteauneuf, but I wouldn't call it a great one. It was a vintage that had a lot of couleur in the beginning, and again, small yields, so growers not always happy with that. But I think consumers can be really happy with the result of this wine. And interesting a side note on Chateau Vuju. It was the estate in Châteauneuf-du-Pape that President Obama and his wife visited when they were vacationing in Avignon. So it's a nice estate. It's sort of isolated from the main road, and security said, "Okay, this is one place where you can go visit." and word is that that Mrs. Obama really liked the avenue. Wine number 6, Château La Fondelue. It's a special cuvée, Le Puy Roland. Like the last cuvée, it's all Grenache. So, really, the rules in Châteauneuf-du-Pape are quite liberal. You can use any of the authorized varieties in any proportion. I've tasted Châteauneuf-du-Papes that are 100% Mourvèdre, 100% Syrah, 100% Grenache, 100% Cunoise, 100% Cinsault. And those are just the main grape varieties. There's a few people that do occasional oddball bottlings of 100% Vaccarès and things like that. So it's a really interesting place to taste, especially if you do blind tastings like I do at the Syndicat, because you don't know what you're going to get next. And you really have to stay on your toes, and keeps you alert, keeps you fresh. Anyway, this one is 100% Grenache. Again, it's an old vine selection, largely raised in, I think it's half in Foudre and half in demi-muid, something like that. Half in Foudre and half in concrete. So yeah, minimal oak influence again, and really fresh and vibrant. And 2016 vintage. So for me, that's sort of the most recent benchmark vintage for me is 2016. Yeah, I mean, you get those wonderful herbal spice complexities, beautiful red berry fruit in that wine, and that wine to me is really showing its stuff today. 95. Maybe I was stingy. Yeah, I'm okay with that. I've been told I'm a tough grader by some people, and for me, I'd rather be tough than easy when it comes to that, because I want consumers, when they buy the wine, to be pleasantly surprised by how good it is, not disappointed that it doesn't measure up to the review. And yeah, that's just the way I feel about it. But certainly, if you're gonna grade vintages, 2016's got to be in the high 90s. Questions on that wine? Anyone? No? That's the name of the cuvée. I don't recall the reason why that's what it's called. I'm sure it's a family reference of some sort. Nothing to do with Michel Rolland, I can assure you.
Maybe just about the oak influence, what kind of oak and usage and type of oak, the barrels.
For the Fondelou? Fondelou is in Foudre, so it's large, old oak, probably French, but so big and so old that there's very little oak influence. And then the other half of it being in concrete, so neutral from a flavor standpoint. Yeah. Wine 7, Domaine Gontinel, Jerez. All Grenache. No wood at all in this one. This was raised entirely in stainless steel. So I think it shows the diversity that Philippe was able to incorporate into the wines he consulted on, right? We've got wines that were quite a bit of new oak, small barrels. We've got wines that have just stainless steel, wines that were a combination of foudre and concrete. He really tailored his approach to each individual property. And so the vineyards, yes, the parcels, the grape varieties, but also, the equipment in the winery. If wineries are set up to work one way, it's very difficult to convince them to change things, to rip out those concrete tanks and put in stainless steel. Right? That's a huge expense, and And Philippe, I think, was more willing than most consultants to work with what he was given and still make it the best it could be. So yeah, all Grenache, all stainless steel, 2016. A bit more extraction in that wine, a little more tannin, needs time probably. Part of that is probably the stainless steel élevage, right? Because it's not getting that micro-oxygenation that you would through wooden staves, that you get a little bit of oxygen from the pores in concrete. So yeah, it's quite tight right now, that particular wine. And I think it just shows that it's going to age well. We try that again, maybe, I don't know, 5 years, something like that, maybe 10. One of the hardest things for me to talk about in terms of these sorts of wines is the aging potential, because I drink them so often young, taste them so often young, and enjoy them young. And for me, something like the 2007, I don't see any huge value to holding that longer, for example. So that's 15 years of age, right? So, okay, the 2016 Continental, yes, it'll age, I think, easily another 10 years for my taste. But it's hard to know. There's no guarantees when it comes to aging wines. Yes, question?
Since there is no oak in this one,
Yep.
what sort of evolution are we expecting of the primary fruit? What is it going to taste like in 10 years if there's no wood in it?
Well, I mean, hopefully even wines that are oak aged in their youth are not going to taste like oak when they get old, right? So yes, there's an influence. For me, it's just a question of taking probably longer for the polymerization of the tannins, for the tannins to soften. And that's why right now it comes across almost like, stainless steel, right? It's got an edge to it, that particular wine. And the thing, oxygen during the early parts can round those edges quite nicely and make the wines easier when they're young. Whereas that wine, yeah, it just needs to stay in the bottle and do its thing. Wine number 8. There's a little more oak in wine number 8, in case you were wondering.
Is that top cuvée? Sorry.
So, wine number 8. Was I stingy on this one? I'm looking at the producer, Monsieur Morel. Was I stingy at 99 points on this? Maybe. Anyway, it's Grenache, 100% Grenache. Yeah, in demi-muit. In new demi-muit. So new oak, 600 liters. Okay. Is it a particular parcel selection?
In fact, what it means to Chateau Vuju, it means the best of the best, because it's the best place, it's the best vine, planted by my great-grandfather in 1905. So we have a low pollution, of course, and Philippe, for me the genius of Philippe, is to try to find all the details in a terroir. And Philippe had the philosophy of each family. So Philippe tried always to push very, very far all the possibilities that the terroir permits us. So Santorum is one of these details, because in the past we take the granted all the parcel, and we had always one tank which was better than the other. And Philippe asked me why. I don't know, Philippe. We must find a solution. Yes, I can begin. And Philippe find the best place in the bigger old vines, because it's 13.5 hectares. It's not a details. That he finds the parcel because we tested the wines a lot. It was this tank, it was one part. The tank number 2, it was another part, etc. And we changed, and we finished to find the area. And so after that, I think it's very interesting to have a pure Grenache, because Grenache represents the symbol of the appellation. And it's a good idea to have a pure Grenache, because you can know and understand the possibilities of this very great variety of rocks.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that to me, it's got enormous power, richness, but also balance and length. And yeah, the wood helps maybe to shape the wine a little bit and give it a more streamlined character on the palate, but it doesn't really flavor the wine in that way. It's more of a structural element. So we'll finish off with a wine I rated 100 points. Yeah, Le Clos du Caillou, La Réserve, also 2016. So, yeah, I like the 2016 vintage. It's you can still find some of the wines from that year around. So it's really, for me, it was a really easy choice to have a few of the wines from that year in this tasting. And, I think they're reaching a point where, they're getting drinkable, even though some people like them more mature. So 16 La Réserve is a blend of 60% Grenache, 40% Mourvedre. And I'm not sure if I have it written here. Yeah, I think generally the Grenache is in Foudre and the Mourvèdre is in demi-muid. So they're in wood but larger volume. And if you're familiar with the different lieux-dits in Châteauneuf, you see these are from La Gigasse and Pignon. So in that same sort of sandy sector where Réas is, and not that far from L'Avenue from Vuju. So for me, there's something special in the effect of Grenache on sand, and it's one of the things Philippe, I think, helped people realize. I mean, sure, there was always Réas, but Réas was always something of an outlier, something different from what everyone else was doing. And Philippe, by encouraging so many of the growers in Châteauneuf-du-Pape to vinify their different parcels separately, was able to really spotlight this connection between sandy soils, deep sandy soils, and Grenache. And the producers, obviously capitalized on it and have made a bunch of really special wines. So that, I guess, in a way, is part of the essence of Philippe's genius on winemaking, and in fact, his genius to me was that he not only was a great winemaker, but also a really nice person. And as critics, we maintain a certain professional distance from the winemakers, from the producers. And so it's hard to say that they're friends most of the time, because producers want something from the critics want something from producers, and there needs to be a certain distance, a certain tension there. But Philippe was one of those guys who was able to bridge that gap quite easily, and really a pleasure to taste with and to work with. And yeah, well, it's always easy when you have great wine in a glass. So that'll just about wrap it up for me. If you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them here. So fire away. Yes. First, your name, where you're from, all that stuff. If you can, if you're willing to. If you're not hiding something from your wife, mistress.
My name is Chris, I'm from Norway. So I'm wondering, as a wine critic, when you taste these wines very young, for me personally, I think it's really hard when a wine is made for aging, 10, 20 years or something. I find it hard to taste them the first year or two because there's so much acidity, tannins, other flavors, which don't reflect the wine the way it is when it's in its prime drinking window. So for me it would be really difficult to say this is like 92, 95, 98 or something. So you can sense there's like good structure, there's good qualities with the wine, but being able to say it's gonna, in 15 years this is gonna be bam, 98. So for me it would be really difficult. Could you say something about your process there?
Yeah, okay. I mean, Robert Parker, when he established the Wine Advocate, he set forth the scoring rubric that we ostensibly follow. And so a wine gets 50 points just for being in the glass. It gets up to 5 points for its color and appearance. So back in the 1970s, when Bob developed his system, basically darker was better. Now I think we take a much more nuanced approach. Personally, when I look at the wines, I'm looking for, is the color appropriate to the type and style of wine? I'm not necessarily looking for a black-colored Grenache because I know that Grenache has reasonably thin skins compared to something like Syrah, and it's just going to look different in the glass, and I'm cool with that. Likewise, traditionally, wines were expected to be quite clear and bright. And now I think we tend to be a little more forgiving in an age of natural wine, no filtration, things like that. We can sometimes be forgiving of a little bit of lack of clarity, I suppose. So that's color. It's up to 15 points for aroma. And I think aromas evolve quite a bit over time. And, but I think one thing I've found over the years is that a wine that is complex young will also be complex old, or mature, if you will. Whereas a wine that is not terribly complex young, it may develop and add some bottle complexity, but the essential elements are never going to reach those heights of a wine that's complex to begin with. Wines get up to 20 points for flavor and finish using Bob's system. And really, flavor's closely linked to aromas. Something like 80% of what we perceive as taste is actually olfactory. A lot of that is about texture, about the mouthfeel, about the structure of the wine and the shape of the wine on the palate. And that, people have different preferences there, obviously. For me, with Grenache wines, it's very much about generosity without sloppiness, right? So a wine has to have a certain amount of structure to age well. If a wine is overripe and lacking structure, it's just going to turn into a chocolatey fudge-like mess as it gets older, and the alcohol will show more. Ultimately, someone much smarter than me once told me, when it comes to evaluating wine, it's quite simple. There's a 4-letter acronym that I use regularly to remind myself. It's quite funny because we have a media sponsor here, Blick, but Blick is the actual 4-letter term that I use to remind. So balance, length, intensity, and complexity. Those are the key elements for me in assessing wine quality. And those are what I'm looking for. And if a wine has those, I think the odds are pretty good that it's going to age well. Does that sort of answer the question? I mean, it's really hard to talk about black cherries are going to turn into, currants or something like that with age, or how do you know if it's going to get saddle leather? Yeah, okay. Any more questions? Yes, up here.
When you reviewed the Clos Saint-Jean,
Yeah.
Was it in the Magnum bottle or was it in the regular?
No, it's sold only in Magnum. It's sold only in Magnum. So yeah.
Was it the top cuvée of this thing?
Sanctus Sanctorum, yes. So there's a few different tiers in Clos Saint-Jean hierarchy. So there's a basic, Châteauneuf du Pape, Tradition, yes. Regular, okay. So there's a regular Châteauneuf du Pape. There's Comme des Fous, there's Deus Ex Machina, and there's the Sanctus Sanctorum. Yeah, I didn't miss any, did I? Oh, the white. Ah. Yeah, no. So yes, among the reds, it's the top cuvée. Anyone else? I mean, if not, I think there's a class in here at 3, so that we probably have to clear the room at some point, but if you want to hang out for a little bit and enjoy the wines, that's fine. I'll hang here. You guys can come up and chat anytime, and in the meantime, there's yeah, there's Philippe, and there are some of his wines. So thanks very much for being here, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.